my name is Leighton Jin. I'm Director of Development for the American Documentary and Animation Film Festival. We're doing something a little bit different. We're talking to some filmmakers outside of AmDocs family, and we're talking Jacqueline. Can you pronounce your last name for me, Jacqueline?
Absolutely. Jacqueline Baylon.
Oh, I would have messed that up.
Yeah, it's I'm from Mexico, so the Y is actually pronounced as an I, so it's Baylon. So, but I got you.
Okay. And then you did a terrific little documentary called Until He's Back, and it's your directing debut. Can you talk to me about what the film was about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Until He's Back, follows the journey of a father who unfortunately finds out that his son left Morocco, unannounced, just jumped on a boat and tried getting across the Gibraltar Strait to get to Spain. He unfortunately does not make it and is found dead on a beach. And so I follow the story of this family's journey in repatriating their son back. That's the main thread. There's also another thread that I intertwine to sort of show the overall migrant crisis, and we follow a rescue mission in the Mediterranean. But the main thread and most of the story really is the focus of repatriation and saying goodbye.
How did you come across this story?
Yeah, so I've been living in Spain, within Spain and New York for the last few years. And every time I am spending a majority of time in Spain, the headlines are always, 50 people die, 20 people die, they've drowned in the Mediterranean. But there's never any question as to who are these people, what has become of these people, or who are these people's families. And every now and then there are headlines of these bodies that are found on beaches. And again, it's just a body was found on the beach, not this is so and so and whose family is so and so. So I was always just like really curious, like, well, why don't we know who these people are? And so I started investigating, and it turned out that there was a mortician down in southern Spain who has dedicated like the last 25 years of his life to trying to repatriate specifically migrants from Morocco back to Morocco. And so I started, spending a lot of time with him and seeing if he would be open to me filming eventually after I got to see his work. And then that's sort of how that started. Eventually I started filming with him.
So this wasn't part. Now, you told me before you were a journalist. Was this a story you had been working on for work, or was it something you kind of stumbled upon and did on your own time?
Yeah, it's something, well, it's a combination. I stumbled upon it, but at the same time, my partner, who's a foreign correspondent for the New York Times, had written about these deaths himself. And so through some of the stories that he had done, I also became curious. And he also eventually profiled Martine, who is one of my characters in my story. So I wasn't doing a story on Martine personally. It was always something that I was curious about because as an immigrant from Mexico who moved to the United States, stories about migration, immigration have always been the kinds of stories that drive me and that I've done and that I've pursued. So this was definitely sort of part of my interest. It just so happened that my partner had profiled Martine first, and then I wanted to pursue a documentary version of it, but then it wound up growing into a much bigger, story. The story it's not just about Martine. The story actually focuses on the family who, goes through all the bureaucracy to repatriate their son.
What kind of parallels? Because I grew up in Arizona, so I'm familiar with the Arizona-Mexico border and some of those issues. The issues that you grew up with compared to the issues here in Morocco. What were some of the parallels that you saw, and how does that shape your coverage of this topic?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the parallels actually surprisingly are not that different, right? Like people aren't very open to immigrants. What I found particularly hard in Spain is that people are more resistant to uh, immigrants that are a different skin color and that are a different religion. So that I found to be even harsher at times than myself growing up in the US. I felt like in Spain, they're a lot more welcoming of Latinos in the way that they're not as welcoming in the United States, which was really interesting. But then when it came to people from right across, like the largest gap between Spain and Morocco is 14 kilometers, which is like not, I don't know how much that is in miles, but it's
Mhm.
it's right. You can see each country from either side. So surprisingly, I just was shocked that people in Europe are not very welcoming to immigrants from across literally the Gibraltar Strait. And as you know, immigration is a very polarized topic in the United States, and it's very similar across the pond in Spain. And I feel like as an immigrant who, also left home, who did not get to say goodbye to her family. I was very young when my mother brought me to the United States. I just really connect with these these stories of people who decide to risk it all. Um, I crossed the Rio Grande in El Paso, from Juarez to El Paso. That is nothing compared to like the ocean, and people just like blindly going to the ocean thinking that they, for hoping that they're going to make it. So I was always really conscious of why people leave, why I left, what kind of parallels I can make to make sure that the family felt comfortable sharing that story with me, because I wanted them to know that I was going to take care of their story as much as I possibly could and tell the best version, the most truthful version of it, based also on my experience.
And that's the one thing about stories like this is earning that trust. Was that something you found difficult? Because you had mentioned people aren't welcoming it in Spain, and I mean, obviously you're not Spanish, but
Yeah.
when they look at you, they might be a little bit maybe hesitant. So for you, what was the process of earning their trust so they could open up and feel comfortable sharing this story, which sometimes they might be
Yeah.
resistant to.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, like I said, I think Spaniards are very open to Latinos, which is nice. We speak the same language, so that alone was incredibly helpful. I did approach subjects, or participants who are Martin, and then an NGO that helps also identify some of these migrants that unfortunately don't make it. All of these people want their work to get out there, right? For the word to be out that they do this kind of work. So for me, it was just a matter of spending a lot of time with them and gaining their trust so that they knew that I was the right person to tell their story. But it wasn't an incredibly difficult barrier because I speak the language. It was even harder. I think the hardest part was in the Morocco side because I don't speak Darija, which is the form of Arabic that they speak in Morocco. And I think the trust there was harder to gain, and it took a lot of visits to Morocco and explain, through a translator what my intentions were. It was tricky because a lot of families held on to hope that if they appeared in this documentary, there would be a bigger chance of them finding their sons. And most of the time, it was young men that go missing, or that take this journey. Men and women and children, they all take it, but it's usually young men. And so I also had to be very honest in saying that I cannot, bring their son back or cannot find their son, but that this is a story that could tell that can tell the world what they're going through. And so eventually, through a lot of translation, through a lot of visits to Morocco, families eventually let me start recording, and I made sure and always ask for consent before filming, and because they can change their mind at any moment, and it was up to them. And so yeah, I think it was just a lot of communicating, a lot of spending time with them and the translator, making them feel and letting them know that I'm sincere and that I really wanted to tell this story.
What was the feedback you got from the family when they saw the movie? I mean, I'm assuming they saw the film already, but what was the feedback from
Yeah,
them?
I think it was the family, just the main family that I feature, their biggest hope was that this film would just help at least one other person, like another family, bring some sort of closure and allow them not to lose, hope. They really, I've got the feedback that they really loved the edit. They thought that the footage was beautiful because they didn't know how cameras worked, right? This is the first time that we were using an FX3, so it was quite a small camera. So this wasn't like a huge production. It was as I actually never really got permission to film in Morocco because they tend to not give you permission to cover immigration stuff or anything that's political. They usually steer away from it. So we were always kind of using like smaller cameras and like make sure that we were kind of under the radar. And I would just like to also add that that was also a risk that we had told the family that this was, a situation. I just want to make it clear that there was never, I was always very candid and open about the situation, and they still went ahead with wanting to tell me their story. So yeah, I feel like I almost lost my train of thought. What was your question?
I believe it's just kind of how what they thought of the film.
Oh
They're just
yeah, what they thought of the
enough.
film. Yeah, they've been like very pleased and like just really grateful that somebody took the time to spend that much time with them. I think watching the film for the father was incredibly hard to sort of relive this, but for the wife, she just really holds it dear to her heart that this was something that was done for her family.
So we mentioned you were a journalist. It's your first time doing a film. What were some of the challenges for you to bring this to the screen?
Well, as any filmmaker, funding is always a challenge. I luckily was backed by Scripps News, which is a company that I do journalism for. Um, I basically like ran out of budget, so then I started paying for it myself because I wanted to see it through, wanted to see it through the end. So that was one challenge, was financial. The other challenge was access, official access. I never really got the official access from Morocco, which is why I'm a little bit hesitant to try to go through a festival circuit in Morocco, just because I still want to be protective of the family. Um, but, I think at the end of the day, I don't think like we politicized it so much, and it's clear that it is a problem all in Europe, not just Morocco. And, I don't just talk about the Moroccan government. In fact, I don't mention them at all. But that was another challenge, was just like getting official access. So we had to actually like figure out how to get into the country with these like smaller cameras. What else? Sometimes there is this language barrier. You're there, you're spending all this time with them. You want to be able to like laugh at every joke, or if they're telling a joke, or you want to tell them a joke. And that I find always really difficult in any reporting that is done in a language that I don't understand. Is I wish that I could just communicate, because that's the best part of our jobs, right? Is to be able to be with people and get to know them. And yeah, I wish I would have been able to communicate even more, because it had to all be done through a translator.
So in journalism, I always thought about doing documentaries now as a print guy. So we're bound by space limitations. I know with you, you're a broadcaster, correct? And you're it's time limitations. Well, although we had time limitations too. What can you tell me how liberating it is to have a documentary where you had more time to really tell a story and tell it maybe fuller than you probably could with with your job, with my job too?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I actually started off in print. It took me a really long time to be able to do video. I had always done like little videos with my print stories, but I started working at the Sacramento Bee. I worked at the San Antonio Express News. I worked at the St. Pete Times, which is now the Tampa Bay Times. And then I worked my way up until I got to the New York Times. And then that's when I was like, I really want to do video. How can I make video happen for myself? So, and then eventually long story short, but I eventually managed to marry both like my video experience with my print experience and have a job that, that allowed me to do video and journalism. I felt like it's interesting in the filmmaking world how shorts and features are so divided. And even though I do feel that, so my short for context is quite long. It's 39 minutes and change. So for like the world of filmmakers and especially festivals, it's an incredibly difficult short to program. And I have gotten my fair share of rejections and lots of beautiful kind notes saying that the film was beloved and loved, but it just couldn't, make the cut because they ran out of like the minutes to program it or whatever. So this is all new to me. I had no idea,
Mhm.
but it has been. I made the film that I wanted to make, and it just so happens that it was 39 minutes and change, and I don't see it being longer, and I don't see it being shorter. So it is liberating that it won that Big Sky because I stood by something that I felt that I made with a lot of heart and a lot of passion, and it was liberating to be able to stick to what you make and see the results. And even though there's been rejections, it's been having a good amount of success. And it started off really strong with Big Sky and winning the best short competition there.
I'll share a little story with you. Maybe it'll be helpful for you. So one of our films we had this year is called Wings of Dust, and I got a chance to meet the filmmaker, get to know him very well. And it was on the short list for an Oscar nomination. He did it as a New York NYU student. He won the
Mm.
student Oscars for it. And he was telling me that he can get his film into festivals. I think his was around the same length as yours. I'll have to double check it, but I knew it wasn't a short. It was a pretty
Yeah.
long short, kind of like yours. And he said he couldn't get any festivals, and then all of a sudden he gets all these nominations. And he said we were one of the first ones to accept it. The movie was released last year, but then he said we were one of the few festivals who accepted it. So I think I understand what you're saying about programming it and get it in there, but it worked out pretty well for him. And so
Yeah,
you never know. I
that's
hope you're entering it.
amazing.
Hope
I'll have
I
to
hope
look
you're
it up.
entering it to some big things. And if you kind of get an Oscar nomination, please don't forget us.
No, absolutely never. You've taken the time to talk to me and interview me, and that's amazing. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, this is just such a fascinating story, and I know so little about it. So it's really enlightening. Like I said, I think I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, so I was somewhat familiar with immigration, and parents were immigrants. And so when I heard about this, I thought that was really just kind of fascinating, just kind of understand immigration in a different country, different continent. And, like you said, there's certain parallels, and it's just really interesting. I think us being Americans, we
Yeah.
think of immigration as one way, and around the world it's completely different, and we keep forgetting, kind of what makes our
Yeah,
country unique.
yeah, definitely. And I also feel that Spain in particular, and I think in a lot of people's minds, is known as like a vacation place, right? So you think of Spain and you're like, oh, tapas and wine and dancing and flamenco. And yes, there's all those amazing, beautiful things. But then, of course, when you dig deep, there's these more serious things that the country is grappling with along with the rest of Europe, right?
Yeah, and it's just like anywhere that's a beautiful touristy place, like Palm Springs.
Yeah, exactly.
What other festivals do you have coming up? Do you have other festival dates booked?
Yes, we are headed to San Francisco International Film Festival in a couple weeks. After that, we will be headed to Mountain Film, which will be great in Colorado, and Telluride, which I hear is beautiful. And then we just got into one called FCAT, forgive me, I don't know what the acronyms are for, but it is one in Spain, and that'll be the Spain premiere. And it actually takes place in a small city called Tarifa, which is one of the places where we filmed. So it'll be really beautiful to bring it home. And then DC Docs in June. So yeah, it's getting in.
Busy world tour.
Yes, it's breaking in, it's breaking through. So I'm very, very happy and just pleased that I think what I've always wanted more than anything is just for people to know Ahmed and Yahya's story. Yahya is the young man who died, and that, you know, people who die are people and have names, and families deserve to be able to say goodbye in their own ways. So yeah.
Well, I think that's going to do it for right now, unless there's something I missed.
No, thank you so much. This is so fun.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. Just sounds like a really beautiful passion project. I know it's always tough with the
Yes,
documentary film to make money, but we're journalists, we're used to that.
exactly. That's right. Well, thank
But
you.
well, thank you for sharing the story, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Bye.